Hi, I'm Rachel with Patterns and Pixels Canada, and on today's video, I work on week 8 of Threads That Binds Mystery Quilt 2023. Week 8 is sewing it all together. Let's get started. This is it. Final week for the Winter Mystery Quilt. I've received the email. I have the instructions. I cannot believe what it looks like. I'm so excited. But before I show you, there is one more package that I need to open. Actually, no, let's look at what I've already made. Then I'll look at the last package. You know, making a quilt, for me anyway, can seem a bit daunting because there's a lot to do, a lot of piecing. Doing it this way, just a few blocks each week, doesn't seem so bad. You know, you just sort of a little bit each week, and I can find time to get a few little blocks made. Whereas if I'm looking at a whole pattern, it's go make the quilt. Seems a bit more daunting. Anyway, week 1, I made this block and this one. It was week 1. Week 3, I made strips, which have now been made into other blocks, so I'll get to those in a moment. Week 3 was this block. Week 4, still my favorite because I used flying geese for this one. And since having made this block, I guess 4 weeks ago now, I've actually purchased myself a ruler designed to trim flying geese. Very excited by it now. So the next time I have a quilt that needs those, I have a fancy ruler for it too. Week 5, these ones. Week 6, and then here's those strips that I had made in week 2 that were then turned into blocks. So I made 3 different styles. One with just one little blue square, one with 2, and then the third one, I had to make a lot of these ones. I've come to call them exclamation marks. They're my exclamation mark blocks because there's a larger piece and a smaller piece. And then in amongst all of that, I did also have to make what I'm going to assume will end up being sashing on the quilt. Let's find out what week 8 is, the final week. There we go. Okay, so fabric again, which must mean I need a few more blocks. This thing has a weird shape. I think there's 2 things in here. A stick. There's a stick. And you know what? It's going to be something else that I have to Google, isn't it? Something else that I don't know what it is. All right, let's find out. Oh, okay. Nail file. That I know. That I know what that is. Okay, so if you've been following my videos, let me grab it. Let me grab what I had in the other weeks. What? I think did I put it in here? I don't know where I put it. I had 2 of these. Now the other one has been put somewhere. So there had been a week where I received this item. I can get this off without pinging it across the sewing palace. Seamus might go for it if I do. Oh my goodness, it's stuck. Hold on. Okay, so just so that here. I'd received this in one of the weeks and didn't know what it was, had to Google it. And it is called Bobbin Clip, I think is the name. And I had to look that up to see what I was supposed to do with it. And I have since discovered that you put your bobbin on first. Key important note is to hold on tightly so you don't spring anything across your sewing palace. And then you put your spool of thread on afterwards, and it handy-dandy keeps everything together. Then, the following week, this was the gift that was inside the bag. And I also didn't know, that was the gift that was inside the bag. And I didn't know what this was. Had to Google that. That apparently is a spool holder, a spool clamp, a spool clip. It does this. It goes onto your spool. Now, now I have these. They've got like little, what do these do? I can't possibly fit anything else on here. Does it go in the top? Okay. There'll be some more Googling while I figure out what these things do. Nail file, very nice. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Always handy. And this is my medium fabric. So, the instructions for this week asked me to gather all of my blocks. Already done. And then they want me to cut strips of the medium blue and remainders from some of the previous week. Okay, I can do that. As well as last week, I had used quite a bit of white fabric to make this sashing, but not all of the white fabric. They want me to get the rest of that white fabric and just make some plain squares. And then the next step is to join the blocks together to make the quilt top, the flimsy. It's so pretty. Okay, let me get the last few bits cut and ready, and then I can start putting these up. I think I'll put them up on the design wall first, just to see. I've got the pattern here. I can see what it looks like. And I'll put my blocks up on the design wall to make it match this. But I said to you in a previous week, I reserve the right to move some of the blocks around. We'll see. The way it looks on a computer screen is often very different than the way it looks on a design wall. And I've also discovered that prior to having the design wall, I used to just put my quilts on the floor. And then I would often stand on a chair and look down at them. And that difference is huge as well. For some reason, looking down at them on the floor, as opposed to with them up on the wall, it's different. And once it's on the wall, I'll often take a picture of it and look at the picture on my phone, because that looks different. I don't know why, and it's probably just my head, but I do find it looks different, and I use that to help me decide if I need to move anything around. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get these last few blocks made, then I can have the fun of putting it up on the design wall. Okay, I've done my Googling, And I can now inform you that this thing that looks kind of like a pacifier is a bobbin buddy. So, if I take the spool of thread that we were working with before, and very slowly, dismantle it, or not, we're stuck. There we go. I didn't pinch it properly. All right, so I'm gonna put that aside. Now I'm going to look at my bobbin buddy. And for the bobbin buddy, you put the pacifier looking thing inside the spool of thread first. Kind of squeeze it in. Then your bobbin goes on top and pull up. You have that. Keeping your items together. I wonder actually, does that... I can fit that one in my container. Oh, exciting. I couldn't fit, well, I mean, the other ones fit, but they had to lie down because they were too tall. I'm still not going to be able to use, my other container has a pegboard in the bottom of it. I talked about this in one of the other weeks. Week 6 maybe? And it wouldn't, no, it's still too tall with the pegboard. But at least now I can keep it in here, can't I? And it's certainly an improvement on my Ziploc bags, isn't it? Alright, so now I know what those are. So many new toys, so much fun. In terms of fabric, it wasn't all that exciting getting it cut and ready. I only needed to cut 3 plain squares, so I've done that. I haven't cut the blue fabric that they gave me. I read the directions in more detail because at the top where the materials are, it just says to cut the strips. So I read down as to why. It's for the binding. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to use it for the binding, but I might not. So I'm actually going to put the quilt up on the display board first before deciding whether or not I want to cut this and use it for the binding. So let me move the camera and then you can see me getting this up onto the board. So exciting! Here we have it. All the blocks are up on the display board, and I think it looks stunning. All right, a couple of notes. First of all, I checked the measurements. This will fit a twin bed at the moment, which is okay. I do have a small bed in the house. We tend to use it for guests. That's a twin. So sorry anyone who visits us, you get the small bed. I have also noticed something, which all of you experienced quilters probably noticed already. Last week when I made the sashing, I made it wrong. Yeah. So this is the sashing here, and you can't quite see it from the camera, but in person you can. I have all of these diagonal stitching lines on my sashing. And the reason why I have diagonal stitching lines on my sashing is because I sewed the pieces together like they were binding. They're not binding, they're sashing. And so for me, it really stands out, especially on this white fabric, that I have these diagonal stitching lines. And it really bothers me. So that'll be something I'm going to want to fix. I'll ponder how I choose to do that, to be determined. In terms of the blocks themselves, this quilt is called Icicles. And I believe that is showing through having the thicker, more dense blocks at the top, and then trickling down into these smaller blocks at the bottom. And I love that. I have put this up exactly the way it shows on the pattern. I might move some things around. You want them, I think, to be random, but I find like this really jumps out to me as being like a dark blue spot, so I might move that. And there were a couple of my exclamation mark blocks that I thought, yeah, I don't know if I like these two being beside each other. I'll have to see. I've put it up on the design wall. I'm not sewing this today. I need to take some time to look at it and decide what it is I want to do. I also have that voice in the back of my head saying I need to change something. Something more than just moving blocks. This mystery quilt was put forward by Threads That Bind in Maxwell. They provided the pattern and the fabric, which means that anyone who took part in this activity is going to have the exact same quilt. And I don't like that. I want mine to look different, but I don't know how yet. So I'm going to leave this up for a while and think about it. I'm going to make sure I come into the Sewing Palace during different times of the day to see it under different lights. I will take a picture of it every time I move something. So I'll take a picture of it now, the way it is, the sort of original version. And then if I do end up moving blocks around, I'll take a photo. I don't want to lose the icicles effect. I like that. But I do want it to look different than everybody else's. I'll leave this here for now. And the next clip that you see will be a fantastic explanation of what I've decided to do. It's been a few days since I put this quilt up on the board, and at the minute I've left all the blocks where they are because I've been focusing on something else. First of all, I have to fix these diagonal lines. Now, I did toy with the idea. I'd rather the lines be straight. I did toy with the idea of just trimming them and moving them up so that now I have a straight seam, which I can do, but then of course I'm going to run out of fabric doing that. So I'd already thought in the back of my mind, okay, I'm going to have to go back to the store and pick up some fabric. And then I thought, well, if I'm doing that anyway, why don't I get enough fabric that I could actually have the sashing be one piece and not something that I have to cut. So I have done that. I purchased enough that I can do it as one long piece without having to cut anything. Then I also got a little bit extra. And I will explain why in a moment. In terms of the sashing that is already up here, the way I have sewn it, I've sewn it like it's binding. And I don't know if I mentioned this now, it's been so long. I didn't cut the binding that they gave us because I didn't know whether or not I wanted to use the dark blue, the medium blue, sorry, as my binding around the edge. I might use this as the binding. It's a bit too wide. I trim it down a bit narrower, but I might end up just using white binding on it. I'm not really sure yet. But what I have been pondering, I went into my stash and I pulled out a variety of fabrics that I think work well with this quilt. I'm going to put that big one aside for a moment. And here's my idea. Here's what I think I'm going to do. I think I'm going to cut very, very, very thin strips. Probably 1.5 inches to get started. And I think I'm going to add a row, kind of randomly into the quilt. It will make it a little bit wider, obviously, but I don't mind if my quilt hangs over the edge of the bed. So just a tiny little strip. And then that's what the extra white is for, because I wouldn't have that little strip going the full length of the quilt. I would have the remainder of it being white, because I like that icicles effect. I like that it sort of lightens as it goes down the quilt. So I've got a really dark blue that I like, a lighter one, and this kind of purpley color I thought might work. It does have blue in it, and I might end up fussy cutting so that the blue bits definitely make it in. I might do long strips, I might do short strips, I might do medium, I don't know, and I'm kind of winging it. I think I might just cut some strips and sew them together and see what happens. The other piece of fabric I found in the stash is this kind of, it almost looks like it was a piece of glass that was shattered, like it's got all these crack lines on it. I have enough of this that I could add another border going all the way around the quilt. I might not, I don't know. It's been a few days since the last clip that you saw, and I'm just about ready to start sewing all the pieces together. I did want to comment, I noticed when I was editing the video together that the last clip I filmed, where I was discussing my plan, cut off a little abruptly. And I had been looking at different ways of doing the binding on the quilt. I think I'm going to stick with just having the white sashing and then going right into white binding on the edge. I'm toying with the idea of including a little strip of blue as piping. I will see how I feel about that when I get to that point, but I decided that I don't want to have a big strip of blue coming around the edge, because I'm liking that the quilt to me is coming across as being mostly white, and I didn't want to then suddenly have a big blue band coming around the edge. I don't know if that showed in the camera. Seamus just took a bottom block off with the pin. Let me just, no sweetheart, that's not safe. He likes to pick up little things. Anything you have around the house. He's going for the next one. This is why I take a picture of my quilts before I put them up. Thank you, sir. So anything little that you leave out. He's all about the tiny things. Paper clips, pen lids, not the pen, the lids, and pins off of the display board. So when we're not in here, we do shut the door to this room, otherwise he takes everything, doesn't he? Yes. When I last filmed, really? Go over there. When I last filmed, I was toying with the idea of adding in little strips to the quilt because I wanted mine to look a little bit different than everybody else. What you see on the display board here, I think is what I'm going to go with. I added in this strip, this one, and that one. I had started out with strips that were 1.5 inches. I then condensed it down to just 1 inch, knowing that when I sew it, it will only show about 1/2 inch. And I think that's what Okay, these are pins, hun. They're not safe for mouth consumption. I think I just want to have very narrow strips. Oh, okay. I might hold the cat, see if I can get through this that way. It's turned into a game now, hasn't it? I would like narrow strips added into the quilt because I still have in my mind icicles And so I'm thinking very small droplets of water coming down, which is why I wanted these to be narrow. I also didn't want to take away from the gorgeous blocks that were part of the original quilt by then having these, giant chunks of fabric. And then you'll notice that I've cut the longer strips to be different heights. And then underneath, I've added in just a little dot of the fabric, again, trying to think of water dripping down. For these sections, I just copied the same pattern that I did for these blocks, just without having the white on the edge. The last thing that I had toyed with, especially with that purple strip at the end, I had considered redoing some of my original blocks to incorporate the fabric that I've added. And then I decided not to. And the reason why is because I'm thinking of that icicles dripping down. And although my initial reaction was, if I've got purple on that side of the quilt, I should have purple on this side to get that balance, I then thought, well, no, because an icicle is going to drip down. It's not going to drip across. And so to suddenly have purple somewhere else in the quilt might not work. I have also changed my sashing so that it's a solid piece. The only one I haven't done yet is the one that goes across the top. Because I've changed the width of the quilt, I didn't want to do that one until I was sure what my width was. So I'll do that one at the end. That means my job for today is to go through each of my strips. I'll start over here and I will stitch all of my rows together all the way down. Once I have all of those done, I will then stitch the rows to each other. So it'll be a long day of sewing, lots of little seams, but I'm hoping to have the quilt flimsy finished for today. The actual quilt itself will happen at some point far down the road when I have time to do it. Nearly there. Let's get started with this final step. Now that I have all of the rows stitched, I now need to stitch them to each other. And I think the way I'm going to handle this is all of the parts where I've added my thin strips. I'll do those first to make sort of wider rows before I go and add in the sashing. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I am dealing with very narrow strips, so I'm a little bit worried about how well they're going to feed through the sewing machine. And I also want to make sure that the seams I have on here match up with the seams I have on the original blocks, so that I don't have any lines that are a bit off when I'm sewing them together. What that is going to mean is a lot of pins. Pins, 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 pins for days to make sure that everything matches. Because the last thing I want to do, hello James, is have to re-stitch anything. You're being ever so helpful. He's so funny. I think it's a typical cat thing. He could be happily sleeping somewhere, and as soon as I start talking, he has to come in and see what I'm doing. And I wonder if it confuses him that he sees I'm talking, hears I'm talking, but doesn't see who I'm talking to. Is that confusing you? He's looking at the cat stand. If we're lucky, he might go on the cat stand. Or back there. I wonder if he's gonna jump, isn't he? I'm gonna move the camera fast enough. Stay there. Don't move. Let's see if I can move the camera. And we can show the internet how you do it. All right, I'll leave it here for a moment and we'll see if he makes the jump. he's decided, there he goes, and he's gonna go again. Or is he gonna stay there? He uses that to get on top of the cabinet. I wonder if he's going to keep going. Because it'd be too easy to climb up the cat stand, wouldn't it? No, you have to jump. Yes, you do, you have to jump. It's embarrassing. Okay, I'm going to take some time now and finish pinning the first strip rows together before I sew them. And we'll see if he stays up there or if he uses that to jump on top of the cabinets. So it's not why I put this here for you though. We're having a bit of bad weather today, so he doesn't want to go outside, which means we have some energy to burn, don't we? Don't we have some energy to burn? Give my sweater back. All right, let me keep pinning. Sort of individual skinny rows sewn together, it's time to put the sashing on. And I'll do that by finding center first. And I think once I've found the center, lots of pins. Lots and lots of pins, and I'll start in the center and work my way out. And then as I sew each row, I'll alternate if I sew from the top or the bottom to help avoid any sort of ripple in the fabric. But we are nearly there. There it is, all finished. This was a pleasure for me to sew. I enjoyed the fact that as a winter mystery quilt, I didn't know what I was going to be doing each week. However, I would get simple instructions and somebody else had already cut out most of the fabric for me. That running you can hear in the background is Salsa chasing a toy. So just ignore that. I loved that, I mean, yes, I did have to do some of the cutting, but the strips were already done for me, so it felt more manageable. It felt easier. You will notice that I've made a few changes from the last clip that you saw. Once I had sewn the quilt together, I decided that I wanted to have a little bit of extra blue striping going around the edge. I also felt that I didn't want that blue striping touching my blocks. So I took the sashing off the sides, cut some very narrow white fabric, and did that all around the edge first. Then cut the same width of the blue fabric. This blue fabric here was initially provided to be used as the binding, and I've now decided I am going to be using white for the binding, so I didn't mind using this here. So I put that all around the edge. Then I cut myself some fresh sashing. Obviously I needed it to be longer now that I made the quilt a bit wider, and I've added that all around the edge. Yes, I will be using white sashing. I probably, most likely, will still be putting in blue piping. I like the linear effect. I like this Icicles idea of everything running down the quilt, which is why I liked adding in those sort of stripes that I did, which is why I then decided to add in a little bit of those stripes around the edge. And I just feel like instead of adding white binding here, I feel like just a little skinny blue piping going around and then the white binding. I'm almost 100% sure I'm going to do that. The quilt is obviously not going to be quilted at the moment. It will get done eventually, sooner rather than later, but not yet. So you have to keep an eye on my Instagram to see when I actually do get it quilted and finished. I won't be doing another video for that. In terms of the sizing, I can't remember. I took measurements the other day and I can't remember what it is. It's a little bit bigger than a throw. Not quite a bed-size quilt. A bit, a bit too big for a couch throw. It's somewhere in the middle. Having said that, I do have a very small child-size bed in the house that maybe this will just end up going on that. But other than that, it is all finished, which means I guess I can get started on my next project. If you have enjoyed watching me create this quilt and you'd like to see some of the other quilts that I'm working on, then you know what to do. Hit that like, subscribe, and bell notification. Bye. Really, cats? You had to make all that noise while I was filming?